for that very comprehensive introduction, Christos. And yes, New London Architecture is very much involved in the debate about London, but also the debate about cities in general. And we've been hearing a lot in recent months as a result of COVID-19 about the death of the city, that New York is finished, that there are all sorts of pressures which will change the way we live in denser environments. And I just want to make the case that I don't think is going to be the outcome. And as the American author Mark Twain said, the reports of the death of the city are greatly exaggerated. Now, I start with a view of, sorry, should be able to change this on my.
You have to request.
I have requested remote control, but it's not working on my keyboard at the moment. So, right. It says use my keyboard layout. I don't know if anyone can help me here. Use my. No.
You may try with the arrows.
Yeah, I'm using the arrows, backwards, forwards, upwards, downwards. No.
Please double click on the screen and then use the up and down arrows.
Double click on the screen.
Okay now.
Well done. Thank you very much. Sorry about that. Yes. So I start with this view of central London in the during the lockdown of the COVID crisis, obviously empty like many cities around the world. The footfall in central London dropped to about 5% of its normal footfall during the lockdown. And obviously this was bad news for shops, museums, art galleries, everything really that actually is an important part of making a central city area. And we have in, I need to go back. Yes, right, okay, I've got this. So we have in London a fairly extensive underground system, public transport system, but of course during COVID-19, this has been very empty, not really working because people are nervous of being within the confined environments and therefore not going into the center as one would hope. And so how do we get out of this situation? What are the solutions to it? And of course, this is one of the key proposals which have been made, which is supported by the Mayor of Paris, has been discussed by many commentators on cities. It's supported by the Bloomberg Foundation, the idea of the ville de quart d'heure, or the 15-minute city, where everything is in close connection to where people live. They can get all their amenities in one place. It's something that is not necessarily new. The new urbanism movement also supported the idea of walking distances, easy connections into all the various facilities that people require within a local environment. But I think we have to understand that this may well work for a more suburban sort of environment, but is not something that works in cities more generally. Now, I would point to this, I think, exceptionally perceptive diagram by Cedric Price, probably one of England's or the UK's most important theoretical architects in the post-war period. And he did this drawing of the ancient city, which is has its protective wall around it with a dense center. And then in the 17th and 19th century, you still had a dense center with the white of the egg, as it were, spreading out into suburban areas. And he talked about the modern city being more like a scrambled egg. And that to a certain extent, that scrambled egg is the diagram for the 15-minute city, of a city which is pretty well evenly spread. Now, I'm going to talk about the evolution of London, which actually creates a naturally polycentric city, but with a strong core. And that is, I think, the way that we have to be able to look at the shape of our cities, particularly those cities which are larger scale global cities, which have key areas of intensity, like New York, like London, like Shanghai, like Paris, Berlin, cities like that. How do we retain that vital center where people coming together of all types is really an essential part of both driving the commercial nature of those cities, but also creating them as social hubs for those cities. So I'll start with some history that this we have here. This is Roman London, which the Romans arrived at about 40 AD, and they stayed in London for 400 years, and they built their encampment right in the center, where today we still have our central business district. And this, of course, was the typical of Cedric Price's hard-boiled egg. It had a wall around it, a dense center, and was a typical historic city. But the interesting thing about it was that as it expands, it then creates roads which move out into connections to other cities and out into the countryside, creating this radial pattern of roads, which is a structure of roads which has been maintained in London really throughout the city's history. And that radial pattern has also been copied with public transport systems, so that although there are a few cross-city and rail tracks and underground tracks, the general pattern of the city is still radial, of roads going from the outside of the city into the center. And that is not helpful for the idea of a polycentric city. Now, this is a diagram which was prepared for the plan of London after the Second World War. So it was published in 1944, and it was something which determined very much the way our planners looked at London during that period. And you can see even then, these little areas of the circles and the oval shapes, these are all local communities, and they have names of them, names which still exist today, although they don't reflect regulatory boundaries. They are actually natural social groupings which do reflect the idea of the 15-minute city. So you have a whole, as I call them, polycentric areas around the very dense and powerful center, which is a draw to larger businesses, to headquarters, but also to the cultural focus of the capital, the cultural focus of the capital, which are museums and art galleries, places that bring people together, both people from within the country to tourists and people from outside the area as well. So as I say, the makings of a polycentric city here already. And this is a more contemporary map showing the structure of London with a strong centre here, and then a whole series of local centres. Some are major retail centres, but also these areas which would come within the term of being 15-minute cities. But one of the things one has to bear in mind when you look at the planning of London is that London is surrounded by a green belt, and that was created after the Second World War as well. The green belt makes it very difficult to develop within an area, a belt of approximately about between 15 and 30 kilometers away from the edge of the London area, which is this red line around here. So it's very difficult to develop within the green area. And so it means developing more densely in the center. But very interestingly, as I was saying, the main public transport movement is radial lines coming into the center from outside the city. But this data, which was produced from Uber taxi ride movements a couple of years ago, shows how there is a huge demand for what I call orbital movement between areas in outer London, which at the moment is badly served by public transport. Most people who move around in an orbital way have to move by car. And so younger people who are more likely to be the customers of Uber's taxis in outer London, clearly you can see from this map, have a huge desire. There is a desire to actually move orbitally rather than always going into the center. And the ability to access relatively cheap forms of private transport in this way shows what the desire lines is. And it's a very interesting example of how data from digital monitoring of movements can provide us with ideas about patterns about how we'd want to move around the city. And so I'm quite envious actually of this map. This is a map of Paris, which shows the changes to the RAR system, which are being delivered as a part of their build-up for the Olympics. And they are creating strong orbital movement patterns around Paris, which is, I think, very important for our future city. And this is not all new infrastructure. A lot of it is connecting up more historic pieces of rail track, which has been underused in the past, but it is creating a new shape for the city. Now, to return to London, this is one of the sort of key centres, one of the London's towns, which is outside of the central activity zone, is a historic centre, a settlement which goes back 1,000 years. And this is one of the key areas where we would see the sort of 15-minute city operating. But also we have, of course, a large number of more recent developments which have happened over the last 10 to 15 years. And those are developed as a part of the London Plan. The London Plan is a strategic plan written by the mayor. And a lot of development takes place in what are called opportunity areas. And these opportunity areas are ones that were previously industrial land. We call it brownfield land, and they've been redeveloped with fairly dense new housing, retail, entertainment, culture, creating, in effect, the 15-minute city. And sorry, to go back to that one, the previous one was, sorry, I'm going in the wrong direction. I can't go backwards. I'm sorry, well, the previous one that I showed was of Stratford, where we had the Olympics, and that became a highly developed area. There was also, you may have seen the image of Wembley Football Stadium. There's a new development around that. And so, as I say, these dense pockets of development have been taking place within opportunity areas, which is a key part of the London plan. But also we have been creating changes to the way people move around the city in a smaller scale way of encouraging more walking and cycling, which we were doing before COVID-19, but this has accelerated, as it has in many other cities in recent months. We started off about 5 years ago with a program which was called Mini Hollands. That was named Mini Holland because it was, we wanted to show that London could be as good as cities like Amsterdam or Rotterdam, that we could actually follow what is the high cycling numbers of Dutch cities. And 3 test boroughs in London delivered an integrated cycling structure which improved streets and created better places for pedestrians, and they have been very successful. In recent months, we have delivered a whole series of new rollouts of such systems, and I know that lots of cities have done it. I've been reading about the Great Walk of Athens as well recently, which I think has run into similar problems to what has happened in London. And the picture you see on the screen at the moment is of a residential area which has been turned into what we call a low traffic neighborhood. And the low traffic neighborhood has become intensely unpopular with car drivers. I think partly because they were instituted so quickly, there was a lack of consultation, but it is something which has created a great resistance to this move, which was happening before, of more access for walking and cycling. And I do fear that actually in the longer term, this may be a backward step, because car drivers don't like the idea of being held up in traffic jams, and they have created a quite a big resistance against more areas like this, which I believe actually improves the quality of life hugely for people in these areas. But there has been a resistance, partly because it makes life difficult for car drivers, but also because it pushes traffic out of these more well-to-do residential areas into busier streets, which are often lined by poorer housing. So there is might say, a class element, an affordability element here, where the wealthier in neighborhoods are able to get rid of the traffic, and that traffic is then pushed into poorer neighborhoods. And that is going to be a big issue as we come out of COVID-19. So in terms of how do we actually think about the design of cities, taking into account, as I say, this idea that we need to have a strong central core and polycentric neighborhoods. And I've used this diagram from Richard Rogers' book, The Compact City, which formed very much the basis of the first London plan, which has driven the way that London has developed over the last 20 years. And as you can see, this is an idea of a city district with a clear urban edge, And as I say, London has the green belt around it, which creates a clear urban edge. It has a denser central activity zone, which is a center for business. It has also satellite environments, which can be of varying sizes. But in terms of this conversation, let's say they are 15-minute cities, and they are all well connected by public transport. And around the public transport zone, you have areas of higher density. As you get further away from the transport nodes, the density reduces. And you can, as in this image, obviously connect those up to other cities via a public transport system. So in the section, you can see the center in the middle of the section with higher density housing around it, dropping down to lower density areas further away from areas with good public transport, then rising up to have denser centers, transport nodes, which could be in more suburban areas and form part of the polycentric city. And so I come to this new building, which has been proposed by Foster and Partners. Norman Foster was involved in it towards the end of his time in the practice. This is a new building which is next to 30 St. Mary Axe, or the Gherkin, as its nickname, which is, it forms a part of the central cluster of the City of London, which is London's central business district. And right at this moment, there is a public inquiry going on about this building. It's a building which is designed as a tourist feature, and it has a viewing platform up at the top with revolving pods that people can sit in, glass pods, which provide a very vertiginous experience as you look out over the city. It's quite close to the Tower of London and historic areas. And so a lot of the debate is about the impact that it will have on the historic areas. But interestingly enough, this is supported by the planning authority in the area that it's sitting, which is called the City of London. The City of London is the central business district. It has a planning committee which is very focused on delivering accommodation for business and has a very positive approach to economic growth. And they have approved this building, but the Mayor of London, who has a strategic view over the whole of the Greater London area, has turned it down. And he turns it down because of the impact on the historic area. But this is something which I think is really a symbol of the whole subject that I'm talking about today, is really how in a post-COVID environment do we make sure that we get people back into the center to both occupy these office buildings in a different way, with more space per person, healthier environment, healthier spaces. But how do we bring people back in, not just office workers, but also when people are able to travel, do we bring tourists back into the center? And this building, I think, symbolizes very much a faith in the center of the city, a faith in a post-COVID environment when people will want to come and visit cities again. It also symbolizes to me a desire to, a way of viewing the city, which is something which in my job, it's really very much about how do people understand the way the city works. And this is a great place to actually view it from there. but it brings people into the center. And it is vital for London, which is a global city, a city which depends on global trade for the activity and vitality of the center, that it maintains the attraction of the wider public as well as the business public, if we are to maintain our both our commercial position, our business position, but also to provide the sort of quality of life that one needs. I've lived in London in the 70s when population was shrinking. I do not think shrinking cities are great places to be in. We need to keep them vital. We need to keep them economically active, and we need to ensure we can attract people to them. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you very much, Peter, for this enlightening lecture. But just listening to your presentation, I assume that, as you said, now we are in the scrambled egg period. When do you think we're going next?
Well, I think the problem is how long it takes, and better people than me have no idea how long it's going to take. So I just think that I hope that vaccinations will change things, but I can see that we are likely most of next year to have restrictions in both on movement and in the way we relate to other people. I would say there is a medium term and a longer term issue. The medium term is, how do you actually keep the businesses going that are key to city areas, the restaurants, the shops, the bars, as well as the galleries and the museums. How do they survive during that period when their incomes are clearly impacted? Because the last thing we want is to have what happened in Detroit, where you start having empty buildings, badly maintained, empty shop units, and so that you get this downward spiral of economic activity. But hopefully we can find ways, and this is very much what the government and the mayor has to do in terms of funding, to actually keep those businesses going until we come out of it. Now, I would say, we are looking at least the middle of next year, and then you have to look at a longer term plan to ensure that once people start coming back into the city, clearly those businesses can continue. And I think it's very important that we have policymakers, mayors and members of parliament, so on, who believe in the centre of the city. And I think there are too many people at the moment who are saying, oh, well, everyone wants to move to the countryside now. Let's give up on the city. We can't give up on the city. We have to focus on a shape of the city. And this, I think, is the right shape for London.
I totally agree with you about the city centres of all cities, that we have to keep fighting for them and keep them alive. But getting away from the pandemic and hoping that everything will go well, what are the ingredients of a city that to keep it alive, to keep it vibrant, and what the city centre should have, and what attributes should have to be able to be sustainable, resilient, and be alive and grow?
Well, I guess the first ingredient is people. In that one of the successes of cities is that you bring lots of people together. They agglomerate together, and that is very positive both for social interaction, but also commercially. That's why cities are inventive. They are wealthy, and actually, in most periods, they are healthier than other forms of settlement. So, but I think that different cities have different attractions that make them places that people want to be. And London has the benefits of history and an amalgam of history and modernism and the overlay of patterns, as I say, which go back to the Romans, and clearly I'm talking to an audience who knows very well the relationship of history and modernism and that sort of shift. But you can go to areas where you have totally new construction, and I would say if you go to somewhere like Doha, the heart of Doha, which has just been completed, to a new master plan, is a master plan which responds very well to local climate, to the social patterns. It has an architecture which is contemporary, but comfortably of the region. And I think that you can actually make cities by really understanding the social networks as well as the enthusiasms of the local people. And I would guess that the mix that I was talking about of culture, of retail, of business, those are and the amenities of restaurants and bars, that mix is something which is pretty international.
Okay, going back to, Nicosia, because your presentation was about London, but I'm not sure if you have ever visited Nicosia. And okay, Nicosia is the last and the only probably divided city and capital in Europe, at least. And we had, after the division, we had a big problem with urban sprawling and extending the city towards the suburbs, and we never had the density. How can a city like Nicosia can grow in the right way? Let's say when because of the division, it cannot really grow in an orthodox way. It cannot grow as a ring around the city center. How can a city reclaim its density, its status when it's divided?
Well, I think that's very interesting, and I showed the green belt for London, and the green belt for London clearly wouldn't be able to go all the way around, but it can constrain some development. The green belt was designed very specifically to stop sprawl. That's why it was designed, in order to create a more compact city and a city with an edge. But also, I think that one of the very interesting things which has been debated for a long time in London, and we haven't made a lot of progress until now, and I think this will be one thing which will be accelerated as a result of COVID, and that is car use pricing, which has been used very successfully in Singapore as a way of monitoring the way people move around the city. And that seems to me the ideal mechanism for controlling movement in a smarter urban environment, as we get better at understanding data and where people need to be. So if you actually want to change the way people move around the city by road use pricing, you can do that by increasing charges and tolls for particular patterns of movement. So if you we would in London be generally wanting to keep people out of the centre in cars, but would probably make it cheaper for them to drive around the periphery. So the suburban areas would have cheaper private transport, cars, because the investment in public infrastructure is probably too great, particularly for the next few decades, I think. But it would mean that you could have a slightly different pattern in Nicosia, where you actually are charging more for people coming into the city from a distance who would be coming from suburban areas, so that if it costs much more to be in sprawling areas, that transport costs are such that people would find it beneficial from a say taxation point of view to be in denser, tighter environments nearer the center.
So you believe that the way forward is to tax the suburban living?
It's to tax by use. I mean, at the moment, I'm sure every nation has some form of taxation for motorists. They pay a tax for the use of roads, but what you're doing is putting a different value on different types of roads, and I think that as I say, in a smart city, is a very positive way of creating really very flexible planning. It is very variable because it's operated digitally, so it can change over time as well, but also will mean that as planners you can actually keep people restricted, keep them out of particular areas, or encourage them to go into other areas.
Okay, and one last question. As you're a keen cyclist, and
Yes.
we share the same hobby, could we ever have completely non-car cities? I know there have been some movements from some cities, some municipalities to abandon the use of cars, but can we really do that? I mean, as the Mediterraneans, and especially in Cyprus, it seems like a very difficult task.
I think it is very difficult. And as I was saying, I think the speed with which changes have been delivered because of COVID-19 means that actually the motorists have become more defensive and have become much more vocal politically. And I can see areas in London where we had authorities who were pro-cycling now becoming quite nervous because the resistance from the motorists have been so strong. I would say, we are in a, if you look at a 20 to 30 year shift, we are into using cars as we know them. They will become electric, but for probably another couple of decades, and then at some stage more autonomous vehicles are going to happen, and you will see another surge of interest in getting tin boxes into urban areas. I would dearly like to change a lot of central cities into walking and cycling, but right at the moment I'm feeling the resistance of the car lobby it's a very hard nut to crack politically.